"Move, you worthless piece of trash." The words were directed at a young man, barely in his 20s, his military uniform tattered and stained. His name was Ethan, and he was on his knees, his hands bound behind his back. The rain poured down in sheets, soaking him to the bone, but the cold was nothing compared to the icy grip of fear that clenched his heart. Ethan had been abandoned by his unit, left to fend for himself in the middle of a war-torn city. He had been betrayed by those he thought were his brothers, left to die in the mud and the blood. The humiliation of it all burned hotter than any physical pain. He had given everything to his country, to his comrades, and this was his reward. Abandonment, betrayal, and now this. The man standing over him, a mercenary with a face like a bulldog and eyes like a snake, kicked him hard in the ribs. Ethan gasped, the air driven from his lungs, but he didn't cry out. "Where is she?" the mercenary snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "Where's the girl?" Ethan's mind raced. The girl. The millionaire's daughter. He had seen her just hours ago, being dragged into a van by these same men. He had tried to stop them, but he was outnumbered, outgunned. He had failed. And now they were here, demanding answers he didn't have. "I don't know," Ethan choked out, his voice hoarse. "I swear I don't know." The mercenary's boot connected with Ethan's face this time, and he felt his nose break with a sickening crunch. Blood poured down his face, mixing with the rain, but still he didn't cry out. He wouldn't. He couldn't. "You think you're a hero?" the mercenary sneered, leaning down so close that Ethan could smell the stench of his breath. "You're nothing. You're less than nothing. You're a dog and you'll die like one." Ethan's vision blurred, the pain in the rain making it hard to see. But he could still hear the sound of the mercenary's laughter, cruel and mocking, as they left him there in the mud, broken and bleeding. But they had made a mistake. They had underestimated him. Ethan was a soldier, and soldiers didn't give up. Not ever. Ethan's body screamed in protest as he dragged himself through the mud, each movement sending waves of agony through his battered frame. His ribs felt like they were on fire, his face throbbed with every heartbeat, and his hands, still bound, were numb from the tightness of the ropes. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when he was so close. The girl. He had to save her. He didn't know why, but something inside him, some deep, unyielding part of his soul, refused to let her die. Maybe it was because he had seen the fear in her eyes, the same fear he had felt when he was abandoned by his unit. Maybe it was because he couldn't bear to fail again. Whatever the reason, he couldn't stop. The rain continued to fall, the cold seeping into his bones, but Ethan barely noticed. His mind was focused on one thing and one thing only, finding her. He had no weapons, no allies, no hope. But he had something they didn't, a will to survive that was stronger than any pain, any fear. He would find her or he would die trying. The city was a labyrinth of ruined buildings and shattered streets, a graveyard of what once was. Ethan moved through it like a ghost, his senses on high alert, every sound, every shadow a potential threat. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he was getting closer. He could feel it. And then he saw it. The van. It was parked in an alley, its engine still running, the headlights cutting through the rain like knives. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he crept closer, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He could see the men now, 3 of them standing guard outside the van. They were armed, their faces hard and unyielding. But Ethan didn't care. He had faced worse odds before. He moved like a shadow, silent and deadly, his training kicking in despite the pain. He took the first man down with a swift, brutal strike to the throat, the second with a knife he had managed to pry from the mud. The third man barely had time to react before Ethan was on him, his hands still bound, but his body a weapon in itself. The fight was short, brutal, and bloody. When it was over, Ethan stood alone, his body trembling with exhaustion but his mind clear. He had done it. He had found her. But as he opened the back of the van, his heart sank. She wasn't there. Ethan's mind raced as he stared into the empty van, the rain pounding down around him. Where was she? Where had they taken her? He had been so sure, so close. But now she was gone and he was back to square one. The pain in his body was nothing compared to the pain in his heart. He had failed. Again. He had been so close, and yet he had failed. The thought was like a knife twisting in his gut, and for a moment he wanted to give up. To just lie down in the mud and let the rain wash him away. But he couldn't. He wouldn't. He had come too far, endured too much to give up now. He had to find her. He had to save her. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to think of where they could have taken her. The city was vast, a maze of ruins and shadows. She could be anywhere. But he had to start somewhere. He had to try. He moved through the city like a man possessed, his body screaming in protest with every step, but his mind focused, determined. He searched every building, every alley, every shadow. He didn't know how long he had been searching, but it felt like an eternity. And then he saw it. A light. Faint but there. A single, flickering light in the darkness. Ethan's heart pounded as he moved towards it, his body trembling with exhaustion, but his mind clear. He had found her. He had to. The building was old, crumbling, but the light was coming from inside. Ethan moved silently, his senses on high alert, every sound, every shadow a potential threat. He could hear voices now, low and menacing, and his heart pounded in his chest. He was close. So close. And then he saw her. She was tied to a chair, her face bruised and bloodied, but her eyes still fierce, still defiant. She was alive. And she was fighting. Ethan's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and rage as he watched her, his mind racing with plans, with strategies. He had to save her. He had to. But as he moved closer, he realized something that made his blood run cold. There were more of them. More men, more weapons. He was outnumbered, outgunned. But he didn't care. He had to try. He moved like a shadow, silent and deadly, his training kicking in despite the pain. He took the first man down with a swift, brutal strike to the throat, the second with a knife he had managed to pry from the mud. The third man barely had time to react before Ethan was on him, his hands still bound, but his body a weapon in itself. The fight was short, brutal, and bloody. When it was over, Ethan stood alone, his body trembling with exhaustion, but his mind clear. He had done it. He had found her. But as he untied her, as he looked into her eyes, he realized something that made his heart sink. She didn't trust him. She didn't believe he was there to save her. Ethan's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as the car sped through the rain-soaked streets, the headlights cutting through the darkness like twin blades. His knuckles were white, his body trembling with exhaustion, but his mind was sharp, focused. The girl sat beside him, her breathing shallow, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. The headlights behind them were relentless, closing in like predators stalking their prey. "We're not going to make it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're too close." Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. His mind was racing, calculating every possible escape route, every possible outcome. The city was a maze and they were trapped in its heart. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when they were so close. The car skidded around a corner, the tires screeching against the wet pavement. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he pushed the car to its limits, the engine roaring in protest. But it wasn't enough. The headlights behind them were gaining, their pursuers relentless. And then it happened. The car sputtered, the engine coughing as the fuel gauge dipped into the red. Ethan's stomach dropped as he realized the truth. They were out of gas. "No," he muttered, his voice low and desperate. "No, no, no." The car slowed, the engine dying as it rolled to a stop in the middle of an abandoned street. The rain poured down around them, the sound of the engine's last gasp drowned out by the storm. Ethan slammed his hands against the steering wheel, the frustration and fear boiling over. The girl turned to him, her eyes wide with panic. "What do we do now?" Ethan's mind raced. They were trapped. The headlights behind them were closing in, the sound of engines growing louder. He had to think fast. He had to act. "Get out," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Now." The girl didn't hesitate. She climbed out of the car, her body trembling with fear, but her movements quick and precise. Ethan followed her, his body screaming in protest, but his mind clear. They had to move. They had to hide. The street was lined with crumbling buildings, their windows shattered, their doors hanging off their hinges. Ethan grabbed the girl's hand, pulling her towards the nearest building. They moved quickly, their footsteps splashing through the puddles, the rain soaking them to the bone. Inside, the building was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of mold and decay. Ethan's heart pounded as he led the girl through the shadows, his senses on high alert. They had to find a place to hide. They had to. And then he saw it. A door. Hidden in the shadows, leading to the basement. It was their only chance. "Down there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Go." The girl nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't argue. She moved quickly, her body trembling as she descended the stairs. Ethan followed her, his heart pounding in his chest. They had to be quiet. They had to be careful. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew. Ethan's eyes scanned the room, searching for a place to hide. And then he saw it. A small alcove hidden behind a stack of old crates. It was their only chance. "In there," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Now." The girl didn't hesitate. She climbed into the alcove, her body trembling with fear, but her movements quick and precise. Ethan followed her, his body screaming in protest but his mind clear. They had to be quiet. They had to be still. The sound of footsteps echoed above them, the voices of their pursuers growing louder. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he held his breath, his body pressed against the girl's. They had to be silent. They had to. The footsteps grew closer, the voices more distinct. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to think of a plan, a way out. But there was none. They were trapped. They had to wait. They had to hope. And then the footsteps stopped. The voices grew quiet. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he listened, his body tense, ready to fight. But nothing happened. The silence was deafening. The girl looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "Are they gone?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan shook his head. "I don't know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We have to wait." The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Ethan's body ached, his mind racing with fear and uncertainty. But he couldn't move. He couldn't risk it. And then the sound of footsteps again. But this time they were moving away. The voices grew quieter, the sound of engines starting up. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he listened, his body tense, ready to fight. But the sound faded, the voices disappearing into the distance. The girl let out a breath, her body trembling with relief. "They're gone," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're gone." Ethan nodded, his body relaxing slightly. But he knew they weren't safe. Not yet. They had to move. They had to get out of here. "Come on," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We have to go." The girl nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't argue. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing through the basement as they climbed the stairs. The building was silent, the rain still pouring down outside. Ethan's heart pounded as they stepped out into the rain, the cold air hitting them like a slap. They had to move. They had to find a way out. And then he saw it. A car. Parked at the end of the street, its engine running. It was their only chance. "Get in," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Now." The girl didn't hesitate. She climbed into the car, her body trembling with fear, but her movements quick and precise. Ethan followed her, his body screaming in protest but his mind clear. They had to move. They had to. As the car sped through the streets, the rain pouring down around them, Ethan's mind raced. They weren't safe. Not yet. But they were closer. They were closer to freedom. And as the city faded into the distance, Ethan knew that they had a chance. A chance to survive. A chance to live. But he also knew that the road ahead would be long and dangerous. And he would have to face his past, his mistakes, if they were going to make it out alive. But for now they were alive. And that was enough. The car roared through the empty streets, the rain hammering down on the windshield like a relentless drumbeat. Ethan's hands were locked on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tight it felt like his teeth might crack. The girl sat beside him, her breathing shallow, her eyes darting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. The headlights behind them had faded, but neither of them dared to believe they were safe. Not yet. Ethan's mind was a storm of thoughts, each one more desperate than the last. He had no plan, no destination. All he knew was that they had to keep moving. Stopping meant death or worse. The girl's father's enemies were ruthless and they wouldn't stop until they had her. And Ethan? He was expendable. A loose end. He knew too much and that made him a target. The girl broke the silence, her voice trembling but firm. "Where are we going?" Ethan hesitated. He didn't have an answer. The city was a labyrinth of danger, and every turn could lead them deeper into the trap. But he couldn't tell her that. She needed hope even if he didn't have any to give. "Somewhere safe," he lied, his voice low and steady. "We just need to keep moving." She nodded, but her eyes betrayed her doubt. She was smart, too smart to believe him completely. But she didn't argue. She knew as well as he did that they had no other choice. The car's engine sputtered again, a harsh reminder of their dwindling resources. Ethan's stomach churned as he glanced at the fuel gauge. They were running on fumes. He couldn't risk stopping for gas, not with their pursuers still out there. But if they didn't find shelter soon, they'd be stranded in the open, easy prey. The rain began to ease, the downpour softening to a steady drizzle. The streets grew narrower, the buildings more dilapidated. They were in the outskirts of the city now, where the shadows were deeper and the dangers more hidden. Ethan's eyes scanned the surroundings, searching for anything. A safe house, a hiding spot, even an abandoned building where they could catch their breath. And then he saw it. A faint light in the distance, flickering like a dying star. It was coming from a small, run-down motel, its neon sign buzzing faintly in the night. The place looked like a relic from another era, but it was their best shot. "There," Ethan said, nodding toward the motel. "We'll stop there. Just for a moment." The girl's eyes widened. "Is it safe?" "Nowhere's safe," Ethan replied grimly. "But we need to rest. And we need to think." She didn't argue. She was exhausted, her body trembling with the weight of everything she'd been through. Ethan could see it in her eyes. The fear, the fatigue, the faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could make it out of this alive. He pulled the car into the motel's parking lot, the tires crunching over gravel. The place was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the neon sign and the patter of rain on the roof. Ethan killed the engine, the silence pressing in around them like a suffocating blanket. "Stay here," he said, his voice low. "I'll check it out." The girl nodded, her hands clutching the edges of her seat. Ethan stepped out of the car, his body stiff and aching, and moved toward the motel's office. The door creaked as he pushed it open, the smell of mildew and stale cigarettes hitting him like a wall. A man sat behind the counter, his face weathered and his eyes dull. He didn't look up as Ethan approached. "Need a room?" Ethan said, his voice rough. The man grunted, sliding a key across the counter without a word. Ethan took it, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. But the place was empty, the air thick with the kind of silence that comes from years of neglect. He returned to the car, motioning for the girl to follow. She climbed out, her movements slow and deliberate, like every step was a battle. Ethan led her to the room, his senses on high alert. The key turned in the lock with a loud click and they stepped inside. The room was small and dimly lit, the air heavy with the smell of damp carpet and old wood. But it was dry, and for now that was enough. Ethan locked the door behind them, his eyes scanning the room for any potential threats. The window was covered by a thin curtain, the bed sagging in the middle. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. The girl sank onto the edge of the bed, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion. Ethan stood by the door, his body tense, his mind racing. They couldn't stay here long. Their pursuers would be searching every corner of the city, and it was only a matter of time before they found them. "We need a plan," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't keep running forever." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. She was right. But every option he considered led to the same conclusion: they were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. And then a thought struck him. A dangerous, desperate thought. But it was their only chance. "Your father," Ethan said, his voice low. "We need to get to him. He's the only one who can protect you." The girl's eyes widened. "But how? They'll be watching him. They'll be waiting for us." "I know," Ethan said grimly. "But we don't have a choice. It's the only way." She hesitated, her mind racing. And then she nodded, her eyes filled with a determination that surprised him. "Okay," she said. "But we need to be careful. If they catch us, they won't," Ethan said, though he didn't believe it himself. "We'll find a way." The room fell silent, the weight of their situation pressing down on them like a physical force. Ethan's mind raced, trying to piece together a plan. They needed a distraction, a way to throw their pursuers off their trail. But every idea felt like a long shot, a gamble with their lives on the line. And then the girl spoke again, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you," she said, "for not leaving me." Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't deserve her gratitude. He had been part of the plan to kidnap her, to use her as a pawn in a game he didn't fully understand. But somewhere along the way something had changed. He couldn't explain it, but he knew he couldn't abandon her. Not now. Not ever. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice firm. "I promise." But as the words left his mouth, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm brewing in his mind. And he knew deep down that the hardest part was yet to come. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the flickering fluorescent light above them. Ethan stood by the window, peering through the thin curtain at the empty parking lot outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the world eerily still, as if holding its breath. The girl sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. The weight of their situation hung heavy in the air, a suffocating presence neither of them could ignore. Ethan's mind raced, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind of fear, guilt, and determination. He had promised her they would make it out of this, but the reality was far more complicated. The men chasing them were professionals, ruthless and relentless. They wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted, or until Ethan and the girl were dead. The girl broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. "What's your name?" she asked, her eyes meeting his. Ethan hesitated. He hadn't expected the question. For so long he had been just a tool, a pawn in someone else's game. Names didn't matter in his line of work. But now, standing in this dingy motel room with her, it felt like the most important question in the world. "Ethan," he said finally, his voice rough. "My name's Ethan." She nodded, as if filing the information away for safekeeping. "I'm Clara," she said. "Thank you, Ethan, for not leaving me." Her gratitude cut through him like a knife. He didn't deserve it. He had been part of the plan to kidnap her, to use her as leverage against her father. But somewhere along the way something had shifted. He couldn't explain it, but he knew he couldn't abandon her. Not now. Not ever. "We need to move," Ethan said, his voice low and urgent. "They'll be searching everywhere. It's only a matter of time before they find us." Clara nodded, her expression resolute. "What's the plan?" Ethan took a deep breath, his mind racing. "Your father," he said. "We need to get to him. He's the only one who can protect you." Clara's eyes widened. "But how? They'll be watching him. They'll be waiting for us." "I know," Ethan said grimly. "But we don't have a choice. It's the only way." He moved to the small table by the window, pulling out a crumpled map he had found in the car. Spreading it out, he traced a route with his finger, his mind working furiously. "There's a train station about 5 miles from here," he said. "If we can get there, we can catch a train to the city. Your father's estate is on the outskirts. We'll have to move fast and stay off the main roads." Clara leaned over the map, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What if they're watching the station?" "They will be," Ethan admitted. "But it's our best shot. We'll have to time it perfectly." She nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Then let's go." Ethan hesitated, his eyes scanning her face. She was brave, far braver than he had expected. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leading her into even greater danger. "Clara," he said, his voice softening, "if something happens to me, if I don't make it, you need to keep going. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just get to your father." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I'm not leaving you," she said firmly. "We're in this together." Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was being foolish. But deep down he knew she was right. They were in this together whether he liked it or not. They moved quickly, gathering what little they had and slipping out of the motel room into the cool night air. The streets were empty, the silence unnerving. Ethan kept his hand on the gun tucked into his waistband, his eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. Clara stayed close, her footsteps light but steady. The walk to the train station felt like an eternity. Every sound, every flicker of movement set Ethan's nerves on edge. But they made it, slipping into the station just as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon. The station was nearly empty, a few early morning travelers milling about, oblivious to the danger lurking in their midst. Ethan bought 2 tickets with cash, keeping his head low and his face hidden. Clara stayed close, her hand gripping his arm like a lifeline. They boarded the train just as the doors were closing, slipping into a nearly empty car at the back. As the train pulled away from the station, Ethan allowed himself a moment of relief. They had made it this far. But he knew the hardest part was yet to come. The ride was tense, the silence between them heavy with unspoken fears. Clara stared out the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Ethan kept his eyes on the door, his hand never far from his gun. And then the train screeched to a halt. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as the conductor's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. There's been an issue on the tracks. We'll be moving shortly." Ethan's instincts screamed at him. This wasn't a coincidence. He grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her to her feet. "We need to get off. Now." She didn't argue, her eyes wide with fear as they moved toward the door. But it was too late. The sound of boots on the platform outside sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He turned, his eyes scanning the car for another way out. And then he saw it. A small emergency exit at the back of the car. He pulled Clara toward it, his heart pounding in his chest. "Go," he whispered, his voice urgent. "I'll hold them off." Clara shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. "No, I'm not leaving you." Ethan's chest tightened. "Clara, please. You have to go. Get to your father. Tell him everything." She hesitated, her hands trembling. And then she nodded, her eyes locking with his. "Don't die," she whispered. "Promise me." Ethan forced a smile, though his heart was breaking. "I promise." As Clara slipped out the emergency exit, Ethan turned to face the door, his gun in hand. The footsteps were closer now, the sound of voices growing louder. He took a deep breath, his mind clear. This was it. The moment he had been dreading. The door burst open and the men poured in, their guns raised. Ethan didn't hesitate. He fired, the sound of gunshots echoing through the car. He moved with precision, his training kicking in despite the fear coursing through his veins. But he was outnumbered. He knew it. And as the bullets flew, he felt the searing pain of one tearing through his shoulder. He stumbled, his vision blurring, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. And then he heard it. The sound of sirens in the distance. The men hesitated, their eyes darting toward the windows. Ethan seized the moment, firing again and again until the car was silent. He slumped against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The pain was overwhelming, but he forced himself to stay conscious. He had to make sure Clara was safe. As the police stormed the train, Ethan's vision began to fade. The last thing he saw was Clara's face, her eyes filled with tears as she knelt beside him. "You promised," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You promised." Ethan smiled, his hand reaching for hers. "I kept my promise," he said softly. "You're safe now." And as the darkness closed in, Ethan felt a strange sense of peace. He had done it. He had saved her. And for the first time in his life he felt like he had done something truly good.